People ask how she talked herself through it. I've never had a clean answer for them. The honest one is that she didn't talk herself through anything, not exactly. She talked at a dead channel and I was the one who made it not dead. That's the whole of it. I was 19 years old, 4 weeks into my first real posting, and I did the one useful thing available to me. Everything else was hers. The forward aid station at Dreveth Hold was a fabric structure, 4 poles and a sealed canopy, set up in a reclaimed loading bay on the north side of the processing compound. The walls were corrugated ceramic panels, pale gray, and in the mornings the light came through a long horizontal gap along the east face where the panels didn't quite meet. It wasn't a medical facility. It was a place we'd agreed to call one because we needed somewhere to put people, and the word helped. I was assigned to it as a supply runner and unofficial secondary pair of hands. My training was 9 weeks of battlefield first aid, tourniquet application, airway management, bleed control. I knew how to keep someone alive until someone else arrived. The station's senior medic was a Terhan field surgeon named Keth-7, attached to the Joint Coordination Unit. She had been working with human combat elements for about 2 years at that point, long enough that she kept a phrase book clipped to her kit bag and had stopped being surprised by us. She was not supposed to be the one doing surgery that morning. That distinction belonged to the station's second Terhan, her partner, who had taken a contaminant hit 3 days earlier and was in containment in the rear compound. The contaminant was biological, a slow Murathi dispersal agent, aerosolized, designed to degrade Terhan neural tissue over a period of days. There was a treatment protocol. It required time and a specific enzyme compound we didn't have in quantity. Her partner was stable, but he wasn't available. Keth-7 worked alone. The casualty on the table that morning was a Terhan signals specialist, junior rank, who had caught a piece of Murathi dispersal casing in his thoracic cavity during the push through the east corridor. It was not a clean wound. The casing fragment had carried trace contaminant with it into the chest, which meant Asavar was working against a biological clock in addition to the structural damage. She needed to remove the fragment, debride the affected tissue, and seal the cavity before the contaminant load crossed a threshold her patient's system couldn't manage. She had perhaps 2 hours from the time of injury. 40 minutes of that had already elapsed. I was not helping in any meaningful clinical sense. I was at the back of the station near the equipment rack, inventorying supply pouches by hand because the rack scanner was throwing error codes. It was something to do. I am not proud of how small that sounds, but I was 19 and the situation was beyond my training, and I needed something to do with my hands. The equipment rack was also where the comms relay sat. It was a field unit, matte black, about the size of a bread box, bolted to a cross support with 2 cable ties and a length of friction tape because we'd run out of proper mounts. It fed audio to the station's medical monitoring loop, vitals readings, atmospheric contaminant levels, that kind of thing. It also received on any open frequency in the local band. At some point in the first hour of the surgery, I became aware of a sound. It was 6 tones repeating, not an alarm cadence slower than that, more deliberate. They came in 2 groups of 3 with a pause between and then a longer pause before they repeated. I registered them the way you register most background sounds in a field station. Noted, filed, not significant. Equipment noise. The relay unit was old. Old equipment makes sounds. But sometime in the second repetition cycle, I noticed they weren't random. The interval between the 2 groups was always the same length. The longer pause before the repeat was always the same length. 6 tones, 2 groups, 2 consistent intervals. Every time. I looked at the relay display. It showed an active receive on a frequency designated Keth-7 in our local band allocation. Keth-7 was listed in the station's frequency log as an auxiliary medical relay, a secondary comms channel used by Terhan field surgeons to coordinate with their equipment. The log note read, "Not in operational use at this installation." The tones repeated. I watched them on the display. I had nothing clinical to offer the woman at the table 12 feet away. I had a comms relay and a frequency I didn't understand and 6 tones playing on a dead channel. So I did what 19-year-olds do when they are trying to find something useful to occupy themselves. I looked it up. The field tablet had a Terhan protocol reference, incomplete, translated badly, but present. I searched for 6 stone sequences in the medical relay section. It took me longer than I want to admit. The translation was machine-generated and the indexing was not intuitive, but eventually I found it. The 6 stone sequence on Keth-7 was a Terhan field surgeon self-relay ping. It was a specific tool. I read the description twice to be sure I understood it. When a Terhan field surgeon was operating under high cognitive load, particularly under stress or fatigue, they could transmit their own procedural narration on an auxiliary relay frequency and loop it back to their own audio receiver. The idea was to close a feedback loop. The surgeon spoke aloud the steps she was taking, heard her own voice confirm them in her earpiece, and used the auditory return to stay calibrated. It was, as best I could understand the translation, a method of keeping oneself on the right page when the pages were moving. The 6 stone ping was the handshake signal. It meant, this channel is open and waiting for a return feed. Keth-7 was open. Asavar had opened it, probably when she first began the procedure, because she always opened it. 2 years working with human elements and she still opened the relay channel out of habit, out of training, out of the way her hands knew to set up a workspace. And then nobody had routed the return feed back to her earpiece, because there was no one to do it, because her partner was in containment, and I was a 19-year-old supply runner who didn't know what Keth-7 was. She had been transmitting into a dead channel for the better part of an hour. I looked at the relay unit. I looked at my tablet. I had the frequency. I had her equipment receiver's local address from the station manifest, because it was listed under active medical hardware. The relay unit had a manual routing function, a simple redirect, the kind of thing a signals technician would do in 10 seconds. It took me about 4 minutes because I had never done it and the menu was not in English. But I found it. I routed Keth-7's receive output back to Asavar's equipment receiver. I don't know exactly what she heard in her earpiece in the moment the feed connected. Whatever it was, she didn't stop working. I was watching the back of her head and she didn't pause, didn't turn, didn't make any sound that carried across the station. She just kept moving. Her hands kept moving. And after a moment, in a low voice, she said something in Terhan that I didn't understand. Not to me, not to her patient, but to the channel, to the relay, in the calm, procedural tone of someone continuing a sentence they had begun some time ago. She talked for another 40 minutes. I don't know what she said. The protocol reference didn't cover surgical narration, and my Terhan was non-existent. I could hear the tone of it, steady, deliberate, sometimes pausing, and then resuming as if she were checking herself and finding the answer satisfactory. It sounded like someone working through a problem aloud, one step at a time, trusting the steps. The patient survived. The fragment came out clean. The contaminant load, according to the monitoring unit, peaked below threshold and fell back over the following 6 hours. Asavar sealed the cavity and moved directly to the next case without breaking. I logged my work on the relay unit as equipment maintenance. Investigated anomalous tone signal on Keth-7, identified as auxiliary medical relay handshake, corrected routing error in local receive chain. That was true. It described what I had done accurately and completely. Asavar never mentioned it to me. I don't know if she knew it had been a routing error rather than a deliberate setup, or if she knew it was me who had corrected it, or if she had simply filed the whole thing under equipment and moved on. She wasn't the kind of person who dwelt on what had already happened. Neither, I learned over the months that followed, was she the kind of person who needed to be thanked in order to keep working. I think about Relay Keth-7 sometimes when I'm trying to explain something to a recruit who is new and overwhelmed and looking for a place to put their hands. I don't usually tell them the whole story. I tell them, find the one thing that's in your actual range. Do that thing. Don't reach past it, don't freeze in front of it, don't wait for someone more qualified to do it. If you can fix the routing error, fix the routing error. The rest of it, someone else may already have in hand.